Hello and welcome back. So today we're looking at fonts. So I've gone to Creative Fabrica and I've gone on freebies and free fonts. Now you can choose a font to play with. So when you're looking at fonts, you want to consider how they're going to cut if you want to cut them, or how they're going to draw if you want to draw them. So let's go for something that has a little bit more body to it. So when I'm looking at fonts, I'm looking at the differences between the thickness and the thinness of places in that font. So whether that's, if we look at the baby doll one, you've got a thicker section on those downstrokes, and you've got this really thin section on the upstrokes. Now, if you're doing that out of vinyl or HTV, that is absolutely fine. But if you're going to try and do that at card, it just would not cut. So you want to look for things where the proportion between the thick and the thin are a bit closer together. So those thin upstrokes actually have a bit more volume to them. Either that, or you're going to be cutting these letters at a very large scale to get those to cut successfully. If we look at cartoon fonts, those are great for cutting out. What you will find in some cases is that the initial image that you see, so if we go into this one here, so super space, it's going to have kind of this 3D effect to it, and that may not necessarily translate through to how you actually see the font install. So it's worth kind of downloading them, testing them out, and seeing whether you like what they come out as. Fonts are something of a kind of weakness of mine, because I just download loads of them. So Farmhouse Christmas actually looks pretty good for cutting because it's got that thicker thin stroke. So if we zoom in, you can see you've got this really bubbly downward stroke, but on these thinner upward strokes, there's still quite a bit of body there. So we're going to go and press download. You're going to see it hop up into your download box. Now, if you're working on PC, then what you're going to do is find your download folder on your PC and do it from there. I'm working on Mac, so when we download, it goes to our downloads folder, which we can find in our favourites usually. You're going to see it comes in as an OTF, so that means it's an open type font. And there are two main types of fonts. You've got TTF, which is a true type font, and OTF, which is an open type font. Now, Canvas, particularly if you're working with an older version of the desktop version, is more kind of geared towards true type fonts. They're well better and things like that. As Canvas has kind of updated itself, you'll find that open type becomes slightly easier to work with. So it really just depends on what operating system you are on. If we click on the font, it's going to give us a little bit of a preview of what that's going to look like. And if you're happy with it, you're going to double click that file. And on Mac, it's going to install into FontBook. On PC, you're going to be wanting to go into Character Map to see it that way. Okay, so we can see all of the fonts that we have currently installed. It's a bit of a mad one, and what I would say is sometimes, and I'm scrolling down to find the font just so I can see if this one's going to be different. Nope, okay. So sometimes when you download a font, the file name will come up as one thing, but it actually installs as something else. So it's usually slightly different. So just to say, don't be surprised if that's the case. It doesn't mean that you've done anything wrong. It's just how it installs. And you can use that within Canvas desktop. Important distinction to make: when you're working online, you need to be able to use something like the Brother Type Converter. Now that is kind of being superseded by the desktop version of Canvas. So if you're on an older PC, older Mac, you'll use the Brother Type Converter. If you're on a newer PC, newer Mac, you're going to use Canvas Desktop instead. Okay, so once we've installed it, and we can see that it is in our font listing here, we can then go into Canvas. So I'm just going to open that up. And we're going to close that initial pop-up window. And let's go to the text tool. We can type our text. So let's go for Christmas, given that's the name of the font. We can go to our drop down and we can scroll down to our Farmhouse Christmas, just there, and that's going to be applied. Now if I make this bigger, we can see that each letter is an individual shape, but when we look in our layers panel, it's going to just say text. That's because it's still editable. We can change the font, we can change what it says, but as soon as we go, right, okay, that's the one that we need, there's one more step we need to take, particularly with script fonts or anything where we have an overlap occurring. So if we look here between the ES and the T and the M, and so on and so forth, you've got this little overlap that happens. I'm going to go to Edit, and we can scroll down and we can weld. Now before we do, I just want to show you something else. In Properties, we've also got the font panel here. We can choose the style, so that will be, for instance, if you've got different weights to a font. So that could be light, medium, bold, black, going from thin to thick. With free fonts, you'll usually find that you only have one style, so that is pretty much as I would expect it. But we do have character spacing underneath that we can kind of tweak, and that's going to change the spaces between the characters. So if you go, actually I really like that script font but I don't want it overlapping, you can make that spacing stretch out, but then you won't be able to weld it. So I'm just going to take that down to -1 just because of that glitch between the M and the A, and it looks like that should fix it. Then we're going to go back to Edit and Weld, and that's going to put it all into one shape. We go to the layers and we can see that it now says shape, and we can still size that down like so. And let's go for another word. So let's go for merry, and this time we'll go for something different. So usually I try to go for the total, opposite type of text. So we could go to something quite bold, quite blocky. Okay, that might be a bit too simple. Let's go for big long list to go through here. Let's go for that one. Fairwater Solid Serif. This is actually one of a set of 4 fonts, and we can pop that on there. Now if we select the two, we can go to Edit, Line to Center, and that will be centered. That's looking pretty good. Now because this isn't touching, we can't weld it. So if you want to do that weld step, you need to nudge that down so that it overlaps the text. It doesn't have to be by a lot, but you just want it that it's enough. Select the two and weld. And there you go. You have a sentiment that you can use for a t-shirt, a sweater, right through to going onto your Christmas cards. Now what I would say is, again, with this font here, it's quite thin, so you won't want to then scale that down because it's going to make that cutting really difficult. So let's undo and undo and undo. Let's take this text and let's change it to something else. So even though we've welded it, we can still go back and change it. Let's try that one. And I'm going to make that a little bit bigger in the hope that we can get that wide to pick up the A in Christmas. There we go. And then weld that one. Now, sometimes with text, it's easier to see if we pop a colour in it. So we're just going to go to Fill and pick a colour. Doesn't really matter what colour, but just to see, it just helps you see that kind of outline shape and where that's going. And that's looking pretty good. And again, that would then scale down much better because we've got that kind of stronger font for the Merry. So let's go back a few steps. I'm going to take this all the way back to Christmas. Oh, I would do if it'll let me. Okay, if it doesn't, we can just pop that up there to one side and we can recreate it, because at this point we can still remember what font it was. And we're going to go back to our farmhouse. Christmas. There it is. Okay, enlarge this back up. And we need to do our character spacing. And let's say we're providing this file as a digital file for somebody else with a scan and cut to cut. Or further down the line, we might want to change that design. So what we can do, instead of having this called text, we can put in a note of what font. And it's useful for us because then if we do need to edit something, let's say we're doing something for a client and we've made a typo, we can then undo our work, backtrack it and go, actually, it was that font. Let's redo the text, choose that font, and away we go. So even if you weld, you can keep that reference. So let's go edit, weld, and let's put that reference back in so we don't forget. Always helps if you can type as well. Let's try that one again, shall we? There we go. Let's get rid of the smaller one and let's go for, instead of Merry, we'll go for Happy. And let's go for something that's got a few weights to it. So let's try Mrs. Eves. So it's going to come in at regular, but it's also got extra weights that you can choose from. So this is a Adobe font. So those install slightly differently if you do have the Adobe kind of connection. So you would install those in the usual way that you would for your Adobe fonts. If you want me to show that on a separate video, just let me know in the comments. So we're going to go heavy, and heavy is a good choice whenever we want to go tiny. Now let's show you something else. Rather than wild this time, we're going to go to remove overlap. Now at this point you may look at it and go, I can't see a difference, but if you look really closely, we've lost the line through our text. So what is actually happening, if I click on our first word and give that one colour, click on our second word and give that another colour, we can then see that we have those as two separate entities. Now I'm going to take that first bit of text and cut that out green. I'm going to take the second bit of text and I'm going to cut that out red. But we're going to know how they nestle back together because we've got these kind of key lines in our text. So that's a top tip for if you need to position multiple colours in a sentiment, is just to do that remove overlap. It's going to make your life easier when you're actually then applying the vinyl. Another thing, if you're doing HTV, don't forget the flip. So just flip it horizontally so that the text reads backwards, because with HTV you cut from the back. You're also going to want to do that with glitter card and a few other different materials like faux leather. So it's a useful tip to learn. And there we go. So in terms of fonts, once you've installed them, you don't have to keep that downloaded file. It's a bit different to things like your SVGs where you need to keep that file for it to be able to be accessed and used. Once it's installed. However, what I would say is if it's a font that you particularly like, keep that download and store it in a folder on Dropbox or some other cloud-based backup, just because if your laptop does fail or your hard drive, then you have still got access to that file that you've purchased without having to re-download it. So I did say I would do a little bit on about how to store files. I'll go into that more when I'm talking about SVGs, because it's such an important step to take with SVGs, whereas fonts you can get away with a little bit more haphazard nature. So because we do that install, you kind of skip that bit. Okay, and there we go. Take care and bye.